Don't skip this, my child. Before you scroll past, before you tell yourself you'll come back later, stop. Because I already know you weren't going to come back, and I love you too much to let you walk away from this moment without hearing what I have to say to you tonight. 30 days ago you began. Do you remember that? You remember the night you decided you were done running, done pretending you were fine, done carrying a weight that was never yours to carry alone? You typed the word, you made the choice, and I was already here. I did not arrive when you decided to seek me. I was here before the foundation of the world. I was here when your mother first felt you move. I was here on every single day you thought you were walking alone through a hallway with no doors, and I will be here long after the last word of this message fades from your screen, and your phone goes dark, and the room falls quiet around you. I need you to hear this the way I mean it, not the way the world has taught you to hear promises. Cheap, breakable, said and forgotten by morning. When I say I will be here, I mean it the way the sun means it when it rises, whether or not you thank it, the way the tide means it when it returns to the shore every single night without needing applause. I am not a fair weather father. I am not the kind of God who shows up for your victories and disappears during your valleys. I was there in the valley. I was there when you couldn't tell anyone how bad it had actually gotten. I was there when you smiled in front of people who had no idea you'd been crying in your car 20 minutes before you walked through that door. Every chapter of your life that felt like an ending, my child, was only the turning of a page towards something new. I need you to let that truth settle into the marrow of your bones tonight, because you have spent so long treating endings as if they were verdicts, as if a closed door meant a closed future, as if a goodbye meant that the story was over, and the credits were rolling, and there was nothing left to do but sit in the dark theater by yourself. That is not how I write stories. I have never once in the history of everything I have created written a story that ended in the middle. What looked like the final page to you was never the final page in my hand. It was simply the place where I turned the paper, where the ink dried on one scene so that a new one could begin, where the chapter closed its cover, not because the book was finished, but because you were finally ready for what came next. Think about Joseph for a moment, because I know you have heard his name before, but I don't think you have ever truly sat with what happened to him the way I want you to sit with it tonight. He was a teenager with a dream, a coat his father gave him out of love, and brothers who hated him, enough to throw him into a pit and sell him like he was cattle. If Joseph had judged his story by that one chapter, he would have believed the whole book was a tragedy. He would have believed that being torn from his home, stripped of his coat, and sold into slavery in a foreign land was the end of everything good that could ever happen to him. But that pit was not the end of Joseph's story. It was the turning of a page. The slave market was not the end of Joseph's story. It was the turning of a page. Potiphar's house, where he served faithfully and rose in favor, only to be falsely accused and thrown into prison for a crime he did not commit, that was not the end either. That was another page turning, even when it must have felt to him like the cruelest chapter of all, because now he had done everything right, and it still cost him his freedom. But I want you to notice something, my child. While Joseph sat in that prison forgotten by the men he had helped, I was writing the next chapter. I was moving a king's dreams into position. I was preparing a famine that would stretch across nations, and I was preparing the one man who would know exactly what to do about it, because I had let every single painful page of his story teach him something he would need for the chapter that was coming. The pit taught him how to survive betrayal without becoming bitter. The false accusation taught him integrity, even when it cost him everything. The prison taught him patience in obscurity, doing faithful work when no one was watching and no reward seemed to be coming. By the time Pharaoh's dream needed an interpreter, I had already built a man who could stand in front of the most powerful ruler on earth and tell him the truth without flinching, because he had already survived worse than a king's disapproval. And when Joseph finally stood face to face with the very brothers who threw him in that pit, he did not say what you would expect a wounded man to say. He said, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Read that again, my child, because it is not just a line about Joseph, it is a line about you. Whatever pit someone has thrown you into, whatever betrayal has stripped the coat from your back, whatever prison of circumstance you are sitting in tonight that feels forgotten by everyone who should have remembered you, I am not finished writing. What was meant to harm you, I am already weaving into the very thing that will save someone else one day, maybe even save you. I want you to think about the widow at Zarephath too, because her story is one you may have skimmed past without letting it land on you. She was down to her very last handful of flour and a little oil in a jug, gathering sticks to build one final fire so she could cook one final meal for herself and her son before she expected them both to die of the famine. That is not a woman with hope. That is a woman who has already written the ending in her mind. She has already decided how the story finishes. And then Elijah walks up and asks her for bread first, before she feeds herself and her child. And if you have ever been asked to give when you had nothing left to give, you know how impossible that request must have sounded to her. But she obeyed anyway. She took the very last of what she had and gave it in faith. And I want you to understand what happened next was not a one-time miracle that ran out the following week. The flour did not run out. The oil did not run dry. Day after day, that jar that should have been empty kept pouring, because when you give me what feels like your very last, I do not simply replace it. I make it last longer than your fear ever thought was possible. That widow thought she was gathering sticks for a funeral. I tell you these stories not because I want you to memorize ancient history, but because I want you to see the pattern, my child. I have never once abandoned a story in the middle, not Joseph's, not the widow's, not Job's, who lost everything he had and still refused to curse me, and who I restored with double what he had before, not because losing it all didn't matter, not because his grief wasn't real, but because I was never done writing his story either. Not Naomi's, who came back to Bethlehem so empty. She asked people to call her Mara, meaning bitter, because she believed I had dealt harshly with her, and yet within that very bitterness, I was already positioning Ruth, already positioning Boaz, already writing a lineage that would lead all the way to a king who would save the whole world. Naomi thought she was living the epilogue of a tragedy. She was actually living the opening pages of a redemption story, so significant it would echo for generations. So when I look at you tonight, when I see the chapter you are sitting in, maybe it's a marriage that fell apart when you thought it would last forever. Maybe it's a diagnosis that rearranged every plan you had made. Maybe it's a child who walked away from everything you taught them. Maybe it's a career you poured your whole life into that ended with a phone call and a cardboard box. Maybe it's simply the quiet ache of a life that looks fine on the outside but feels hollow on the inside. Need you to hear me clearly. That chapter is not the whole book. I know it feels like the whole book because you are living inside of it right now, and when you are inside a chapter, it is hard to see the cover, hard to remember. There are more pages after this one, but I am not writing a tragedy over your life. I am writing a redemption story, and redemption stories always require a chapter that looks like loss before the reader understands what it was actually building toward. I want to speak now to the specific ache I know some of you are carrying, because I don't speak to crowds without speaking to hearts, and I know the difference between a general blessing and a word that lands exactly where you are wounded. Some of you are exhausted from being strong. You have held yourself together in front of everyone who needed you to be the strong one. The parent who never got to fall apart because the children needed feeding. The friend who has become everyone's counselor, but has no one to call when the sun goes down and the apartment goes quiet. The one who prays for everyone else's healing and has quietly stopped believing there is any left over for you. I see you. I see the version of you that nobody claps for. The version that cries in the shower because it's the only place with enough noise to cover the sound. The version that says, "I'm fine," so often that you have almost convinced yourself it's true. I did not create you to carry what you are carrying alone. I said, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Not, "I will give you a to-do list of things to fix yourself." Not, "I will give you 7 steps to feeling better." Rest. Actual rest. The kind that comes from setting a burden down at the feet of someone who is strong enough to hold it so you don't have to hold it anymore. You have been trying to carry a weight that was designed for my shoulders, not yours, and I am not asking you to be stronger. I am asking you to be honest enough to hand it over. Some of you are waiting on something you have prayed about for so long that you have started to wonder if I heard you the first time, or the 100th time, or the 1,000th time you whispered it into a dark room at 2 in the morning. Maybe it's a marriage you're praying will be restored. Maybe it's a child you're praying will come home. Maybe it's a body you're praying will heal, or a womb you're praying will finally hold the life you have longed for, or a door you're praying will finally open after years of knocking on wood that never seemed to budge. I want you to understand something about waiting that the world has never taught you, because the world treats waiting like wasted time, like the space between the things that actually matter. But I do not waste time, my child, and I do not waste waiting. Every year that Abraham and Sarah waited for the promised child was not a delay in my plan. It was the very process by which I stripped away their confidence in their own strength, so that when Isaac was finally born, there would be no question about who did it. It was not Abraham's youth. It was not Sarah's body working the way it used to. It was me, and only me, and the waiting was what made that undeniable. If the child had come the first year they tried, they might have thought it was their own doing. Because it came after every human possibility had been exhausted, there was no explanation left except mine. Your waiting is not punishment. Your waiting is not evidence that I forgot you. Your waiting is the very field in which I am planting something that will be so clearly mine when it finally blooms that no one, not even you, in your most doubtful moments, will be able to say it happened by accident. I want to tell you about the storm on the sea, the one where my disciples were in the boat, and the wind was so violent, the waves so high, that grown fishermen who had spent their lives on that water were convinced they were going to drown. And where was I? I was asleep in the stern on a cushion, completely undisturbed by the very storm that had them shaking with terror. That is not a detail I want you to skip past. I was not asleep because I didn't care. I was asleep because I was not afraid. The storm that looked like it was about to end their lives was, from where I sat, nothing more than wind and water obeying laws I had written into existence before either wind or water had a name. When they woke me, terrified, asking if I even cared that they were about to die, I stood up, and I spoke 3 words to the storm. "Peace, be still," and it obeyed me instantly. The way a dog obeys the voice it has known since it was a puppy, the way the whole created order recognizes the voice of the one who made it. I am telling you this because whatever storm is rocking your boat tonight, whatever wind is howling through the cracks of your life, whatever wave feels tall enough to swallow you whole, I have not lost a single hour of sleep over it. Not because I don't care about you. Let me talk to you about Peter for a moment, because I know some of you feel like you have failed me too many times to be trusted with anything good again. Peter denied he even knew me 3 times on the very night I needed him most, on the night before the cross, while I was being questioned and mocked and beaten. Peter stood by a fire and swore with curses that he had never met me. If anyone had a reason to believe his story was over, to believe he had disqualified himself permanently from ever being used for anything meaningful again, it was Peter. He wept bitterly. He believed, in that moment, that he had ruined everything. But I did not come back from the grave to make a list of everyone who failed me and cross their names out of my plans. I came back and I specifically, intentionally, personally sought out Peter on a beach at dawn, cooked him breakfast over a charcoal fire, the same kind of fire he had denied me beside, and I asked him 3 times, once for every denial, "Do you love me?" Not to shame him, to restore him. Every time he answered yes, I gave him back a piece of his purpose. Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. The man who denied me 3 times became the man who preached the sermon that saved 3,000 souls in a single day. The man the early church was built upon. The very rock I said I would build my church on before he ever failed me at all. I tell you this because I know some of you are carrying a version of Peter's shame tonight. You did something you swore you would never do. You said words you cannot take back. You walked away from me for a season, maybe a long season, and you believe that the door back into purpose is permanently closed to you because of what you did. My child, I do not restore people who have never fallen. I restore people who have fallen and are willing to let me pick them back up. Your failure is not a disqualification. It is, if you let it be, the very fire where I forge the kind of compassion and humility that I cannot build into a person who has never needed forgiveness. I want to tell you about Elijah under the broom tree, because I know some of you are exhausted in the exact way that only comes after a great victory, and no one talks about that kind of tired enough. Elijah had just called down fire from heaven in front of the entire nation, had just defeated 450 prophets of a false god in the most dramatic single display of power in his entire life, and within a single day, one threat from a furious queen sent him running into the wilderness, collapsing under a broom tree, and asking me to let him die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life." This was not a man who had lost his faith. This was a man who had just watched fire fall from the sky at his own word, and he was still that depleted, still that afraid, still that close to giving up entirely. I want you to notice what I did not do. I did not lecture him about his lack of faith after everything he had just witnessed me do. I did not remind him of the miracle from the day before and ask why it wasn't enough to sustain him now. I let him sleep. I sent an angel to touch him gently and simply said, "Get up and eat." He ate and slept again. And the angel touched him a second time and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." Twice. I fed him before I asked him a single question about his crisis of faith. Only after he had rested, only after his body had been cared for, did I ask him what he was doing there, and even then I did not scold his despair. I gave him a gentle whisper instead of another display of fire, because I knew the fire was not what he needed this time. He needed to know I was still present in the quiet, still present in the whisper, still present when there was no spectacle at all. And then I gave him purpose again. New work, a companion in Elisha, a reminder that he was not as alone as he believed, that there were still 7,000 others in the land who had never bowed to a false god. People he did not even know were out there fighting alongside him. If you are under your own broom tree tonight, worn down not because you have failed, but because you have been faithful for so long without rest, I am not going to lecture you either. I am going to feed you first. I am going to let you sleep, and when you are ready, I will remind you gently that you are not as alone in this fight as the exhaustion has convinced you that you are. I also want to speak to those of you who feel invisible, who feel like you have spent your whole life pouring into people who never notice, working jobs that never get recognized, raising children who won't understand your sacrifice until they have children of their own, showing up faithfully to a life that the world would call small and unremarkable. I want you to remember the widow who put 2 small coins into the temple treasury, while wealthy men dropped in large, showy sums that clinked loudly enough for everyone to hear and admire. To every human eye watching that day, her gift was the least significant one given. But I was watching too, and I told my disciples that she had given more than all of them combined, because they gave out of their abundance, and she gave out of her poverty. She gave everything she had to live on. I see your 2 coins, my child. I see the sacrifices no one claps for. I see the meal you skipped so your children could eat. I see the overtime you worked in silence, so no one would know how close to the edge you actually were. I see the prayers you prayed for people who never knew you were praying for them. None of it is invisible to me. None of it is wasted. I am not keeping score the way the world keeps score, with likes and followers and applause. I am keeping score with faithfulness. And by that measure, some of the people the world has never noticed are building the greatest legacies in my kingdom. I think about Zacchaeus too, a short man, a tax collector despised by his own people for cheating them on behalf of an occupying empire, so unwelcome in the crowd that he had to climb a sycamore tree just to catch a glimpse of me passing by. He did not expect to be noticed. He was hiding in plain sight in the branches, an object of scorn to everyone standing below him, a man who had made himself wealthy by taking advantage of his neighbors. And yet when I reached that tree I stopped, looked up and called him by name, a name I should not have known, for a man the whole town had already written off. "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." Not, "I might consider it if you clean up your life first." Not, "Let me see some evidence of change before I associate with you." I invited myself into his home, while the crowd grumbled that I had gone to be the guest of a sinner. And it was that invitation, that undeserved, unearned nearness, that changed him from the inside before he ever changed a single behavior on his own. By the end of that meal, without me demanding it, Zacchaeus offered to give half his possessions to the poor and repay everyone he had cheated 4 times over. Grace reached him first, and transformation followed grace. It was never the other way around. You are not too despised, too compromised, too far up your own tree of shame and self-protection to be seen tonight. I am not waiting for you to climb down and clean up before I call your name. I am calling it right now, exactly where you are hiding, and I am inviting myself into whatever mess you have not yet shown anyone else, because I already know what's there, and I am coming anyway. Now I want to tell you about a woman I will simply call Elena for tonight, because her story is not so different from stories many of you are living right now, and I want you to see yourself in her. Elena was 34 years old when the life she had built came apart in the space of a single spring. Her husband left in March quietly, with a kind of finality that told her he had been planning it for longer than she had known. In April, her mother's health took a turn that no one had prepared her for, and by May she was driving 2 hours each way twice a week to sit in a hospital room and hold a hand that used to hold hers. By June, the job that had felt stable for 11 years announced layoffs, and her name was on the list. Elena told me one night, sitting in her car in a hospital parking lot because she didn't want her mother to see her cry, that she felt like she was watching her whole life get demolished floor by floor, and she didn't understand why I would let all of it happen at once. She said she had done everything right. She had gone to church. She had tried to be kind. She had tithed even when money was tight. And she wanted to know what she had done to deserve a spring like that. I did not answer her that night the way she wanted me to. I did not give her a reason because some reasons are not meant to be understood in the middle of the chapter. They are only meant to be understood when you turn around and look back at the whole page. But I sat with her in that car. I was the reason she didn't drive away and do something reckless with her grief. I was the small, stubborn thread of hope that kept whispering that this was not the end of her story, even when every circumstance around her screamed that it was. 2 years later, Elena was leading a support group for women walking through divorce, using every ounce of pain from that spring to sit with other women in their worst season and tell them, with complete credibility, I know it feels like it will never end, but I promise you, it does not stay this dark forever. Her mother recovered more than the doctors expected. The layoff pushed her, after months of fear, into work she says she would never have had the courage to pursue if her old job had stayed comfortable. She told me 2 years later, sitting in that same kind of car but for an entirely different reason, that she finally understood I had not been punishing her that spring. I had been clearing ground. Everything that fell apart was structurally unsound, and I was not going to let her keep building on a foundation that would have collapsed eventually anyway, taking far more with it than it did in that one hard season. I tell you Elena's story because some of you are living her spring right now, and you cannot yet see what I see. You are standing in the rubble asking why, and I am asking you to trust that the demolition is not the whole story, that I am not a God who tears down without a plan to build something better in the empty space. I do not promise you an explanation for every hard season, but I promise you a presence in every hard season, and I promise you that presence is worth more than an explanation ever could be. I want to tell you about Hannah too, because I know some of you have been praying for a breakthrough so specific, so personal, that you have never said it out loud to another human being. Hannah wanted a child so badly that she wept until she could not eat, and her rival taunted her year after year for the empty place in her arms. She went to the temple and prayed with such intensity, her lips moving but no sound coming out, that the priest watching her actually assumed she was drunk and rebuked her for it. That is how desperate her prayer was. That is how much it cost her to keep asking after so many years of silence. I did not answer Hannah with an explanation for why the wait had been so long. I answered her with Samuel, a son who would go on to anoint 2 kings and speak for me to an entire nation that had stopped listening. But I want you to notice something about Hannah that I need you to carry with you tonight before the child ever arrived, before there was a single sign that her prayer had been heard. She got up from that place of weeping, and her face was no longer sad. She believed me before she saw me move. That is the kind of prayer I am listening for tonight. Not the prayer that only trusts me after the answer comes, but the prayer that gets up from the floor still empty-handed and still chooses to walk in peace, because it has decided to trust the character of the one it prayed to, not just the outcome it is hoping for. I want to talk to you about Gideon too, because I know some of you feel like you are the least qualified person for what I am calling you to do. Gideon was hiding in a wine press, threshing wheat in secret, because he was terrified of the enemies who had been raiding his land for years when I called him a mighty warrior. He laughed at me, essentially told me his family was the weakest in his tribe, and he was the least significant member of his family. That is not false humility, my child. That is a man who genuinely believed he had nothing to offer. I did not argue with Gideon about his qualifications. I simply kept showing up, patiently, again and again, as he asked for one sign after another, one fleece after another, needing more proof before he could believe what I already knew to be true about him. I never got frustrated with his fear. I met every single doubt with patience, because I was not looking for a man who had already conquered his fear before I called him. I was looking for a man who would obey me in spite of it. And when the moment finally came, I actually told Gideon his army was too large, because I did not want anyone to look at the victory afterward and say their own strength had won it. I cut his army down from 32,000 men to 300, and with torches, trumpets, and clay jars, that tiny remnant routed an army as numerous as locusts, camels without number, because the battle was never about the size of the army. It was about whose hand was actually holding it together. If you feel like Gideon tonight, hiding in your own wine press, threshing your own quiet fears where no one can see how afraid you actually are, I want you to hear what I said to him, because I am saying the same thing to you. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Not because you have already proven yourself, because I already see what you cannot yet see in the mirror. I think of the woman with the issue of blood too, bleeding for 12 years, having spent everything she had on physicians who could not heal her, growing worse instead of better, ceremonially unclean for over a decade, in a culture that meant total isolation from ordinary life, from worship, from touch, from community. 12 years of being untouchable. 12 years of exhausting every human solution, and yet, she did not stop believing that healing was possible. She pressed through a crowd that would have condemned her for even being there, reached out, and touched the hem of my garment, believing that just a touch, just the edge of the fabric, would be enough. And it was. Power went out from me the moment her fingers brushed that hem, and she was healed instantly, after 12 years in a single second, because faith does not need decades to work once it finally reaches out. I stopped in the middle of a crowd, in the middle of an urgent journey to heal a dying child, because I felt that touch, and I would not let her disappear back into the crowd unseen. I called her out, not to shame her, but to let her hear, in front of everyone who had once required her isolation, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Some of you have been bleeding for years, maybe not literally, but in every way that matters. You have spent every resource you have on solutions that left you worse instead of better. You have grown so used to being overlooked, so used to being told your condition is chronic and permanent, that you have nearly stopped reaching for anything at all. I am telling you tonight, reach anyway. You do not need a loud prayer or a perfect theology to be healed. You need enough faith to stretch out your hand toward the hem of my garment, and I promise you, I will feel it, and I will stop for you, because I have never once been too busy to notice the desperate reach of someone who still believes I am who I say I am. I want to speak now about the manna in the wilderness, because I know some of you are worried about tomorrow in a way that is stealing the peace out of today. When I fed my people in the desert, I did not give them enough manna to store up for a month. I gave them exactly enough for one day, and I told them not to try to hoard it, because whatever they tried to save for later spoiled and bred worms overnight. I wanted them to learn to trust me daily, not to trust their own stockpile. The provision was miraculous, but it was also disciplined enough for today, and a fresh supply waiting again tomorrow morning, without fail, for 40 years. You are trying to carry tomorrow's anxiety today, and it is crushing you, because I never designed you to carry more than one day's weight at a time. I taught you to pray for daily bread, not monthly bread, not a lifetime supply, because I wanted you to keep coming back to me, to keep depending on me fresh, every single morning, instead of trying to build a fortress of self-sufficiency that leaves no room for me to show up. Whatever you need for today, I have already provided. Whatever you will need for tomorrow, I will provide it tomorrow, exactly on time, the way I did for 40 years in a desert with no grocery stores, no rain, and no explanation that people could see except that I said I would provide, and I did, every single day, without exception. I want to remind you of David too, standing in front of Goliath while grown soldiers trembled behind their shields. David was a boy sent to deliver bread and cheese to his brothers, not a warrior sent to fight anyone. Everyone around him saw a giant who had terrorized an entire army for 40 days. David saw an uncircumcised Philistine defying the armies of the living God, and the difference in perspective was the whole battle. He did not measure the giant against his own strength. He measured the giant against me, and by that measure, the giant was already as good as dead. I want you to hear that distinction tonight, because whatever giant is standing in front of you, the diagnosis, the debt, the addiction, the broken relationship, the fear that has followed you since childhood, you have been measuring it against your own strength. And of course it looks unbeatable that way. I am asking you to measure it against mine instead. David did not need Saul's armor, heavy and unfamiliar and not built for him. He needed 5 smooth stones, a sling he already knew how to use, and a God he had already proven faithful in smaller battles, guarding sheep from lions and bears where no one was watching. The giant fell with 1 stone, because the battle was never about the size of the weapon. It was about the size of the God behind the boy holding it. I want to tell you about Paul's thorn as well, because I know some of you were praying for something to be removed from your life that I have not removed yet, and you are starting to wonder if I even care. Paul asked me 3 times to take away a thorn in his flesh, some persistent, painful affliction that Scripture never fully names, and I did not remove it. Instead, I told him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul did not receive the miracle he asked for. He received something I consider even greater, the discovery that my strength shows up loudest in the places where his own strength had completely run out. I am not promising you tonight that every thorn will be pulled the moment you ask. Some thorns stay, not because I am withholding love from you, but because I know that in your weakness, in the very place you feel most exposed and least capable, you are about to discover a strength that was never yours to begin with. It was always mine, waiting to be revealed in exactly the place you thought disqualified you the most. I want you to hear something else, my child, because I know the voice of shame has been louder in your life than the voice of grace for longer than you would like to admit. You have believed somewhere deep down that you have to clean yourself up before you are allowed to come close to me. You have believed that your sin, your mistakes, your relapses, your anger, your addictions, your bitterness, your doubt, that all of it puts you on a waiting list for my love, that you have to prove yourself worthy before I will actually delight in you. That is not who I am, and I need you to let that lie die tonight. I did not wait for you to get cleaned up before I loved you. Scripture tells you plainly that while you were still a sinner, while you were still running the other direction, while you were still choosing everything except me, I demonstrated my love for you by dying for you anyway. Not after you fixed yourself, not after you earned it, while you were still in the mess. That is the kind of love I offer you tonight. Not a reward for good behavior, but a rescue for the desperate. And if you are honest with yourself, you know you are desperate for something real, something that does not run out, something that does not leave when you disappoint it. I know some of you are afraid to come back to me because you think I am angry with you. You picture me with my arms crossed, tapping my foot, waiting to remind you of every time you walked away. That is not the picture I gave you in the story of the prodigal son, and I want you to really see it tonight. That son took his inheritance, left his father's house, and wasted every bit of it on reckless living, until he was so broke and so desperate that he was feeding pigs and wishing he could eat what they ate. When he finally decided to go home, he rehearsed his speech, ready to beg to be treated like a servant, because he believed he had forfeited the right to be called a son. But while he was still a long way off, while he was still far from the house, still covered in the dirt and shame of everything he had done, his father saw him and ran to him. Not walked, ran. An older man in that culture, hiking up his robes and running down the road in a way that would have been considered undignified, because dignity did not matter to him in that moment. What mattered was his son coming home. He didn't wait for the apology speech to finish. He didn't make him work off his debt first. He wrapped his arms around him while he still smelled like the pigsty, called for the best robe, put a ring on his finger, and threw a party, because his son who was dead was alive again, was lost, and now was found. That is who I am, my child. I am not standing at the door with my arms crossed. I am running down the road toward you, robes hiked up, undignified in my eagerness, because I have been watching for you this whole time, and the second I see you turning toward home, I do not wait for you to finish your speech. I meet you in the road. I want to say something plainly, without any parables tonight, just directly to you. You are not too far gone. You are not too broken. You are not too old to start again, too young to be taken seriously, too scarred to be used, too tired to be renewed, too lost to be found. Every excuse the enemy has whispered to you about why your story is finished is a lie, dressed up to sound like wisdom, but it is a lie all the same. I specialize in resurrection. I specialize in taking what looks dead and breathing life back into it, in ways that leave everyone who doubted standing in stunned silence. Lazarus had been in the tomb 4 days, decomposing, and everyone told me it was too late, that there would be a bad smell if the stone was rolled away. I rolled the stone away anyway, and I called him by name, and he walked out of that tomb still wrapped in grave clothes, alive. I am calling your name tonight too, my child. Whatever tomb you have been sitting in, the tomb of a dream you buried because it hurt too much to keep hoping, the tomb of a relationship you gave up on, the tomb of a version of yourself you thought was gone forever. I am standing at the entrance, and I am calling you out of it. I do not need you to have it all figured out. I do not need the grave clothes off before I call your name. I just need you to hear my voice, and take the first step toward the light, and I promise you, the people around you will help unwrap the rest. I want to close by circling back to where this began, because I want the last thing you hear tonight to be the same thing I opened with, so it sinks all the way down into your spirit, and doesn't just pass through your ears. Don't skip this, my child. 30 days ago, or 30 years ago, or 30 minutes ago, however long it has been since you first reached out to me, I was already here. Before your first prayer, before you knew my name, before you had any language for the ache that made you look up in the first place, I was already there, already loving you, already writing a story for your life that was better than anything you could have written for yourself. Every chapter that felt like an ending, the pit, the prison, the empty jar, the stormy sea, the denial by the fire, the widow's mite, the barren fig tree, the far country, the closed door, the sealed tomb. None of them were the final page. They were the turning of the page, and the best part of our story, yours and mine, has not been written yet. I am not finished with you. I was never going to be finished with you, because I did not fall in love with the polished, put-together version of you that you show the world. I fell in love with the real you, the tired you, the doubting you, the you who cries in cars and prays in whispers and wonders if anyone is actually listening. I am listening. I have never once stopped listening, so walk with me. Not because you have to prove anything. Not because you have finally become good enough, but because I am asking you, the way a father asks a child to take his hand before crossing a busy street, not because the child is capable of crossing safely alone, but because the father wants to be close, wants to protect, wants to walk beside. Let us write the rest of the story together. Let me turn the pages you thought were the ending into the beginning of something you couldn't have imagined for yourself. Let me take the pit and turn it into a palace. Let me take the prison and turn it into a platform. Let me take the empty jar and pour out more than you have room to receive. Let me take the tomb and roll the stone away. If you are still here, if these words found you in exactly the place you needed to be found tonight, I want you to do something simple. I want you to type the word together. Not for me, I already know your heart, but for you, because there is power in declaring out loud or in writing what you believe in the quiet places of your spirit. Type together if you are done trying to write this story by yourself. Type together if you believe the chapter you are in is not the whole book. Type together if you are ready to walk with me into everything that is still ahead, everything I have already prepared, everything that is going to make this current pain feel like the small, necessary turning of a single page in a story far too beautiful to end here. I am not finished with you. I was never going to be finished with you. 30 days from now, 30 years from now, and on the very last day, when the final page of your life on this earth turns into the first page of forever, I will still be here. I will still be writing, and I will still be walking beside you, because that has always been the plan, not a story you write alone, but a story we write together, you and I, one faithful page at a time.